Okay.
Okay. So again, I'm not sure that any of my students are showing up because they're teaching fellows and most of them are teaching right now. But I'm going to introduce Nancy Hartshorn.
Hello.
Friend and advocate. And she's going to talk to us a little bit about inclusion and her experiences with inclusion. Now, do you see a picture of me? Because I don't see a picture of me. Not that I need a picture of me. You do?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
No, I'm
There's
not here. That's Nancy. Okay, so why don't we start and I'll record it and then my students can watch later unless they happen to join while we're talking. Okay. Thank you again for giving up some of your summertime to talk.
Absolutely.
So the first question is, can you tell us a bit about your experiences with your son, Jacob?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting time to talk about this because he's leaving school this year. In Michigan, kids with disabilities can stay in school till age 26, which is really different than every other state, which is 21. So we've had a long time to go through this. He's been in school since age 0. When he was born, he has charge syndrome, which causes deafness and blindness, balance disorders. A lot of people with charge syndrome can do pretty well. I mean, I know people in college and graduate school. I have a school psychologist friend who has charge, but my son falls on the low end of the spectrum educationally. So he's considered deafblind and pretty much needs one-on-one care all the time. So when we got to kindergarten, I had read a lot about deafblindness and what are best practices, and the National Consortium on Deafblindness was recommending full inclusion for kids who are deafblind. So we pushed for that at our school, and it was tough because nobody with severe disabilities, this was 20 years ago, had been fully included before in a local school. This is just a small town, and we had obviously some pushback, and there was a lot of negativity, but we pushed for it, and he got into the full-time kindergarten. And we've just gone from there. So from kindergarten through 6th grade, he was fully included. He had all his therapies pushed into the classroom except for speech therapy, which he needed, a quiet auditory place for that. It went really well. Should I go ahead and answer the second question? It went really well. He had a lot of friends. Excuse me. That's my husband. I'm going to hang up on him. Wait. I'm on a conference call. Can I call you back? Okay. Sorry. He had a lot of friends. We had a circle of friends at school. So a lot of the friends he had self-identified in kindergarten, 1st grade, 2nd grade, people who really cared about Jacob and wanted to assist him in school. We started to have monthly meetings for him. For his circle of friends. And when he was very young, they were a lot about fun and parties and snacks after school. But as he got older, the children started to really advocate. And even in 1st and 2nd and 3rd grade, these kids were on his side and bringing up things that kids realized, but we didn't. So things like, why does Jacob have to sit in a wheelchair in the lunchroom? Why can't he sit on the bench with us? And we had just had him in this wheelchair for so long, it never occurred to us that he was fully capable of sitting on the bench. And so we started having him sit on the bench with his friends. And then they started giving him their food, and he started stealing food from them, and they just thought it was great fun. So that was kind of the beginning. Your question about how does the school community get to that place? Well, it was the kids. The adults weren't there. The kids were there. The kids had no problem with it. They didn't know Jacob wasn't supposed to be in their classroom. They had no other school experience. He was always there. And they advocated for him, and they pushed the teachers to do more. It was interesting. One little girl who was very popular in the 6th grade was running for president of the student council, and I remember seeing her poster on the wall, and it said, school activities I'm involved in, and the first thing on there was Jacob's circle of friends. And then she had talent show and, choir and all these other things. So that was really cool that they saw that as a status symbol. So after Jacob got out of elementary school, we went to the middle school, and our middle school is kind of a mess for everybody. People here talk about it being just kind of a way station between elementary and high school. There's only one middle school in our whole town. It's just a mess, and I didn't expect it to go well, and it didn't go well. The special education teachers there did not want to take the time to get to know Jacob. They wanted him to fit into what they had, and that's really unusual because he has deaf blindness. He's got very specific needs they had never seen before. So it's kind of a way station and kind of a waste of time. He didn't have a lot of good experiences there. He was in a French class, and he also went to music class, and he went to gym class. So his friends still saw him, but most of the time he was segregated, and there was pretty much nothing we could do about it. They just didn't want to give the way we did in the elementary level. When he got to high school, he was still included in some classes, but mostly he was in a self-contained room. But the self-contained room was for moderately cognitively impaired students. And so for Jacob, that was almost an inclusive setting because these young adults were really way ahead of him. They became his assistants. They would walk him down to the hall to the bathroom. They would get really proud if they could help Jacob get his lunch, which really helped those guys too. It was pretty amazing. So he had wonderful teachers in high school. He's been at that high school for 12 years now, if you think about going from 16 to 26 or 14 to 26. And things really blossomed there. He got a deafblind intervener. He works at different agencies in the community now. People know him. He goes grocery shopping, and people will come up and talk to him. And, since he can't speak to us and tell us who they are, sometimes we have no idea. And finally, he lives in his own home. Here you can see this is his house, and this is a couple of years old. These are his caregivers from a couple of years ago when he first moved in. Funny picture. We have others. We now have 5 men working with him as well. Most of these people are students at our local university, students in special education, occupational therapy, rec therapy, speech therapy. So people who are really, really interested in Jacob and his needs, and they just love him. They become his best friends. So here's some pictures of him at his house, enjoying himself. He loves living over there. He's got, as I said, 24-hour care through a habilitation waiver through Medicaid. And, he's got his community consists of these people. We recently had a person-centered planning meeting for him, and everybody had to identify who they were in Jacob's life. And each one of them identified themselves as Jacob's staff and Jacob's friend. So they were paid supports, but also natural supports, and they would do anything for him.
So it's kind of like, what you said about early on in elementary school, the children were the one who got it, and the children were the one who advocated for him. This is almost an extension in a way, because living in your own home is an example of inclusion.
Yes.
Because it goes against, what the former, recommendations or thoughts were, where people with severe disabilities lived in institutions.
Yeah. Or even group homes, sometimes, but we didn't want that for him. He would not thrive in a group home. He would be the person who just stays in his room all the time and never got attention. So, because he doesn't ask for it. He's pretty passive. So unless you get him up and doing something, he won't get up and do anything. So he would be neglected. The students that work with him, and some of them are older now, but it's been interesting in an inclusive, the way you're talking about it, because he was college age and his helpers were college age. In fact, one of the people who works for him and has been working for him for about 6 years now was in his circle of friends in elementary and middle school and high school. And she's just blossomed into this amazing person. And she now lives just around the corner from us in her own apartment. And she works with Jacob a lot. So she's seen him grow up, and the natural support became a paid support. And she's also a natural support. She lives over there in her own home, and Jacob knows he can go over there anytime he wants. She has a little stop sign she puts on the window when she's not home or she's having a party or something. But other than that, if the stop sign's not there, he's just allowed to walk in. It's very cool. But so So the inclusion has turned into a lifelong situation for him, and he's really a part of this community. So there are many conceptions of inclusion. The way I interpret the word inclusion, I always talk about there's full exclusion, and then there's mainstreaming, where you bring children into the classroom during the times that they can succeed without support. So maybe mainstreaming someone just for math or something like that, or what you typically see is mainstreaming people just for specials, what we call specials. I don't know if that's what you call them there. Gym, music, art, things like that. But that's not full inclusion, because children don't see the people with disabilities as part of the classroom. They're just visitors. So to me, being fully included means you are in the classroom you would be in if you did not have a disability. You are in the school district, in the building you would be in, and you have all the supports needed brought to you. So that whole, there's t-shirts and things that say inclusion or special education is not a place, it's a service. So these kids shouldn't have to be pulled out unless it's educationally necessary. For instance, like my son needing to go to speech therapy, because that had to do with needing an extremely quiet environment. He's being trained to use his cochlear implant, things like that. That makes sense. Or you bring kids with him from his classroom to speech therapy with him to take part and help talk to him. I mean, that's the what do they call that? Reverse inclusion or something like that. Yeah.
It's interesting. They did a lot of that in the early years with my son. They let him choose students to come to therapy with him. And honestly, at first it made me a little bit uncomfortable. I thought, what are these other parents going to say when they hear that their second grader is missing reading and math time with their on-level peers to go to therapy with my son? But the kids were so excited to go.
Oh,
and
cool.
no one ever seemed to mind. In line with this different conceptions of inclusion, what always strikes me as rather unfair is how, each district kind of draws a line as to, who can be included and who can't be included. So my son could not be included in New York City, and there are many districts on Long Island that couldn't promise me that they could include him. And, certainly when I read their literature, it seemed like he fell on the wrong side of the boundary. So I'm just wondering if you have any, as an advocate for other families and as a parent and a psychologist, like what do you think about these districts that, set up these boundaries between who can be included and who can't? And, what's the motivation for that? Is it that some districts are just looking for kids who can do the actual curriculum and not kids who might not be able to do it? What do you think?
I think, school districts are like little or large dysfunctional families a lot of times. Sometimes it's the teacher who just doesn't want to do it. I think a lot of what's going on in individual buildings is driven by the administrator. We had an administrator, for instance, with Jacob, who was so negative about this. She made me cry at almost every IEP. She said something like, why don't we make sure we're doing this because it's what's best for Jacob and not what's best for us? She said that to me in front of this big meeting full of people. And my husband said, well, of course we don't want what's best for Jacob, or something like that. It was awful, just awful. And then we had a teacher who the principal said one year, none of the third grade teachers want to have Jacob in their class. So let's think of some alternatives. It was just horrific. So then the next year, she retired. We got a new principal who brought us in and said, okay, what do we need to do to make this work? It was such a difference. And the whole community at the school of the teachers and the administrators changed toward inclusive education. And then the interesting thing is a lot of students in the Mount Pleasant area who had severe disabilities started to become included, fully included, because of what Jacob had done. I think, at the same time, I was working as a school psychologist in a nearby district, and it was very negative toward inclusion for kids with severe disabilities. They had some co-teaching classrooms where they had two teachers who were working with students with learning disabilities, co-teach with general ed teachers, 3rd and 4th grade teachers, and they were all very gung-ho about it. It was very exciting, but that was a little pocket inside that whole district. And no other classrooms did it. It was just those 2 classrooms. And if you talked about severe disabilities, and I was the school psychologist there, and I was very passionate about what I was doing with Jacob, so I would bring it up in special ed meetings. I would talk about it here and there. They weren't ready. They didn't want to hear it. And so, you know, like you said, it's little pockets. I don't know. The variations have to do with the way people define it. You know, the definition is so vague. I can't remember what the exact definition is now because I don't look at it anymore very often, but something about can succeed with supports. Something about that is in the definition. And so people take that differently. And so, you know, my son can succeed with supports, which means a one-on-one deaf-blind intervener with him all the time. But in other places that don't want to pay for that support, they see that as him not being able to succeed in the inclusive classroom. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it depends what supports they're willing to give to it.
Yeah.
Also how you define success.
Yeah, it comes down to money. Yeah.
And okay, so in what way has inclusion expanded life's possibilities for Jacob?
Well, I think I've talked a little bit about that already. We wanted to, his circle of friends and all the person-centered plans we've had throughout his life, even since he was 5 years old, and the kindergartners were talking about what they dream for Jacob as he gets older. They only thought about what their lives would be like as they got older. So they said he lives in his own house. He has a house full of bubbles. He has a hot tub. He has a swimming pool, all the things he loves. And they would talk about one of the fears they had for him. This was really funny. One of the fears the 5 and 6-year-olds had for him was to be caught in a fire. And it's because they had just done Fire Prevention Week. So they were all thinking about how afraid they were of fires at the time. But all through his life, people have dreamed for him to live in his own home. And so we never had any other idea for him. And it made it work. And all the people came together and made that happen. I think the other families that I've consulted with within our town who have followed in Jacob's footsteps have really had some great experiences. Jacob was the icebreaker, you know, and once he was through and they saw that legally they had to have him come through, then other people saw what we were doing and asked for the same thing. School districts got on board. Now it's happening all the time. I have one family whose son is on the autism spectrum and was pretty significantly delayed. And she was really worried. She wanted her son included. And so she wanted me to go to her IEP with her for kindergarten. We went to the kindergarten IEP, and she said she was so scared. She was ready to cry. She was ready to fight. She had been to partners and policy making trainings to learn about all the law. She had all her paperwork in front of her, and they asked her what she wanted. She said, I want my son fully included with an aide. And they said, okay. And she was just so relieved. And I didn't need to be there, and that the school just did it for her. Well, this child graduated last year from high school, still very significant disabilities in terms of speech and language. He was able to graduate with a regular diploma with very little help, mostly just getting from one class to the other. But once he got there, he was able to do the work. The senior class voted him homecoming king. It was just amazing. I remember seeing that he was homecoming king and calling my friend Busola and saying, wow, he has really come a long way. Is he in sports and doing all this stuff? And he must be so competent that the kids voted him for that. And she said, no, he still has a lot of problems. They just love him. And it was just amazing to me. Then I went to his graduation party. We have big open houses here in the Midwest. And I talked to him, and it was very obvious to me that he still really, really, really struggled with social and speech and stuff like that. And I was just astounded that the kids did that. It's really made a huge difference to that family.
And incidentally, I don't know if I shared this with my class, but I actually met Nancy in a chamber music retreat. she was a singer and I'm a clarinet player, and we played in a trio together. And that was before I was married, before I had children. But she told me a little bit about her son Jacob, and we stayed in touch. And when my son was exhibiting delays and started down the special ed route, she actually, by coincidence, happened to be in New York City, and she left a day free for me, even though she was busy presenting at conferences. And she really hit me over the head about, what an injustice I was doing. She remembers it a little differently, but she made me feel really stupid about agreeing to educate my son in a self-contained classroom. And her words really stuck with me. I let him be placed in the self-contained classroom, and things started to fall apart rather quickly. And I just, went and called her up and, got all the support she could give me. And, she was really my inspiration for pulling him out. And I think we may be joined. Are those some students joining?
Yes.
Ellen.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Nice to see you. Oh, Ellen Dupree. Okay, so can you see both me and the speaker? You can play around a little bit with Zoom. There's a couple of tabs at the top. You can go to gallery view or speaker view.
I don't know. She actually.
Okay. Can you hear?
Oh, yes.
Okay. Can you see the question on the screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay. Can you see Nancy?
Yes.
Oh, wonderful. Okay. So we just going through a couple of questions, and she's telling us a little bit about her experiences with her son. She's a psychologist and a parent of a child with disabilities. And I just finished saying how she was actually my inspiration. We met through music. And before I even was married, before I had children, and once I had a son with disability, she really stepped in and educated me about inclusion. So there's actually a picture of her son with one of his housemates.
That one is really funny because she'll deliberately make funny faces so it looks like they're doing it together. Jacob just makes funny faces when you take pictures of him. He does it on purpose to make it look like they meant to do it that way.
So our next question is, for society to view disability as negative, a deficit model. In addition, disability is often an unwanted challenge, if not an undeniable tragedy. From the first time I met you nearly 20 years ago, I sensed mainly pride and excitement in your voice when you spoke to your son. How do you reconcile this with the messages you receive from society? Why do you think the negativity persists? And how can we as teachers turn the tide here to a perspective that's more optimistic?
First, I'm wondering if maybe, Ellen, you could, if you turned off is there a way to turn off microphone? Because I'm just getting a ton of background noise.
There is a mute button on the top.
Oh, it looks like she's done it. Okay.
Great.
Thank you, because I just really couldn't hear anything. Yeah, undeniable tragedy. It's really interesting. One of the things that happened to us as our son was not making a lot of progress, because you always have a lot of hope. You think when your child's born, we can fix this, he'll be typical, he'll do everything everyone else does. But as the years went by and he really wasn't making a lot of progress in terms of communication and stuff, we had to come to the point where we said, you know what? If Jacob is like this for the rest of his life, it's okay. We still love him. And then when he did make progress, it was like a gift. So anything he does, like for instance, I don't want to embarrass him. I don't think he cares, but he's 26 years old. And I think this summer for the first time, he's going to start wearing underwear instead of diapers because he's not having accidents. That's huge. And, not only does it save money, but it's just a huge accomplishment. And the fact that he can still make these gains at this age is awesome. I don't know. People stare, people look. I've just gotten so used to it. I don't care anymore. Since he was a little kid, I would always answer people's questions. These people who work with him all have the exact same they all have the exact same kind of philosophy about it. So they'll take him to the grocery store and people will stare and they'll say, hey, Jacob, say hi to them. And, you know, he can fist bump and he can give high fives and they'll just try to include him in everything so that he's accepted. I think it's interesting because our town had the last institution in Michigan was housed here in our small town. So when the institution closed, all of those people were sent back to their communities, but many of them didn't have a community, so they just housed them in Mount Pleasant. So we have a lot of people with disabilities here in our community. And I think people just accept it here. The deficit model that existed in 1989 when Jacob was born, I think, at least from my experience in my own community, I don't live in a big city where there's a lot of people you don't know staring all the time. I live in a place where people know my kid. And so they rejoice with him. You know, they love him. They say hi, Jacob, to him. And when he does something cool, they rejoice. They care about him. I'm not sure if I answered your questions because the question went off the screen. So,
I think you did.
Okay.
Someone just called in. Hello, who's there? Hello. Okay, just want to. Hello, who's there?
It's Jenny Grange.
Oh, great. So it works when you dialed in, but not when you videoed in.
Yeah, it's a different meeting ID, but I've got it sorted now. Thank you.
Okay, great. Okay. So the other thing and there's one other student on, Ellen, if you want to, you can also, you can type in a question. I know, Ellen, we asked you to mute because you were in a noisy room, but if you have, why don't we take a minute and just ask if either of you have questions? I know you're just kind of coming in the middle. So, but you can also, there's a chat feature, so you can chat a question, write a question down, or you can unmute and ask a question.
Yeah, I've just managed to log in on my computer, so that should work better, and then I can type questions rather than speaking because I'm in a room with lots of other people as well.
Okay, okay, great.
And I can't move, I'm afraid.
Okay, okay, glad you could be there. So, okay, our next question for Nancy, what do you see as the main barriers to a more inclusive school system and society?
Oh, that's a really interesting question. You know, I think what we've seen happen the last few weeks with the Supreme Court decision and everything, I think our inclusive society, if you think from that standpoint, is really changing and changing quickly. And I've always seen disability as not the last frontier in terms of rights, but, you know, where we are now with what just happened with the LGBTQ community has come after disability. I think people are more open to disability than they are to a lot of other things now. But so in those terms, I think sometimes the main barriers are money, government stuff. You know, the way our government is all moving toward being driven by money and people with a lot of money. So, for instance, in Michigan here, school systems have just lost so much money over the last several years. And so classes are getting bigger, supports aren't there, they're cutting here and there and everywhere. And so the economy makes a big difference in all of this. Attitudes, I think, are changing a lot, especially as younger people grow into becoming the teachers, the administrators. So my own personal experience is that people who were close to retirement, especially administrators and teachers who had always done things the same way, were the ones that had a really hard time switching and really didn't want to. They saw it as a lot of extra work. But as the young people are moving through, and the young people have actually gone through school with people with disabilities, it's not a big deal to them. People with disabilities didn't go to school till I was in 8th grade. I remember when they came to my school and we all thought it was so odd, but they were still very segregated. So now these kids have gone to school, people with disabilities have been with them, especially with autism spectrum disorders being on the rise more and more and more. It's just going to become part of society.
Okay, thank you. I love this picture.
This is April, who works with Jacob, and she has worked with Jacob since she was a sophomore in college. She's now a special education teacher, has been teaching for 4 years, still works with him on weekends because she just doesn't want to leave him. She loves him so much. And this is at her wedding, a picture we got at her wedding.
Beautiful picture. Okay, let's see. Oh, okay. 2 more questions for you. What advice do you have for new teachers who embrace inclusion but are surrounded by an administration which is at times indifferent to it, if not hostile?
Yeah, this is one of the things April goes through all the time. She's an inclusion teacher. She's one of the people who floats to different classrooms. But she has, the administration is positive for her. There are some teachers who just won't do it, which I think is really odd, you know, that you can choose whether to include people or to segregate and be discriminatory. She just pretty much stays away from the negativity and the negative people and tries to get her kids into the classrooms where the teachers are willing. This is hard, and I don't know how much this happens anymore because, again, here I am at the other end coming out of school. So the administration, especially at the elementary school, the administration sets the tone. It's really difficult. My advice would be to support the parents as much as you can. We had a speech pathologist who came to an IEP and said, we're taking Jacob's speech time down, cutting it down by half. And I knew, because she had talked to me about it ahead of time, that they were cutting 2 speech positions in our district. So everybody was taking on bigger caseloads. And they told them to cut the hours of every kid. And so they were saying, we're cutting Jacob's hours by half. Well, his disability was mostly a language and speech disability. And so I looked at her in the IEP and I said, what is the educational need for cutting it in half? Is he doing that much better? And she just stayed silent. And so the administrator had to answer the question, and we ended up appealing that decision, and he kept his hours. So it's a squeaky wheel gets the grease, and it's too bad everybody else lost their speech. You know, it's unfair, but I had to advocate for my kid. So I don't know, I guess if you have parents that you can talk to and advocate with, you know, to push against those barriers. I know that's a difficult place to be because you are employed by that place. So, you know, I think just trying to do what you can to push that agenda. I hope it's getting better out there. Diane, is that not your?
You know, it's definitely excellent at the district my children attend. It's not that great at the school at which I teach. You know, we have some administrators who are very supportive and others who, even though the school is inclusive and, you know, takes children with disabilities, we have administrators that put up roadblocks. And I even had one who, believe it or not, I have a great relationship with still. He retired and we're in touch. But I had a student who was in, she had a learning disability and some speech delays. And she was in the lowest math group and she really wanted to try middle math. She was mistakenly put in my math class for 2 weeks. And then they moved her back down to low, and she really wanted to move back up. And without even consulting me, the administrator tried to stop it until the parents brought a letter from a lawyer saying that we were denying her least restrictive environment. And when he told this to me, even though he knew me and he knew I'm a passionate advocate for inclusion, he didn't quite get it. And he came to me and he said, I have really bad news, Diane. Emily is moving back to your class. And I know, you know, she's not going to do well. And I said, no, I said, she will do well. We will make it work. And a couple weeks later, I had the parents call another IEP meeting. I had calculator use put on her IEP. She had no number sense. She couldn't add numbers even under 10 and get the correct answer. But I wound up teaching her algebra. She needed a calculator with her, but that everyone uses a calculator by 8th or 9th grade. And the parents went to him and were, you know, praised what was going on in my class. And he actually came to me and said, well, I'm happy it's going well, but I'm a little upset that you threw me under the bus. So,
Because
you know,
you're teaching well? That was throwing him under the bus?
including a child who has a right to be included. And the crazy thing is that I'm so used to this already that I can still be friends with this person. I had to go, you know, I guess I feel also that, you know, we can't respond by anger. We just have to keep the conversation going.
Yeah.
And, you know, again, he taught in a very different day and age. He just left a 40-year career as a principal, and actually in a district neighboring to the district my kids attend, but a district that is not inclusive. So, I don't know. You just do the best you can do, and you do it happily, and you reach out to the parents, and you make sure that they know that you're there to support them. And for this particular child, I think you give a little extra, and then you try and get other people to give extra. I met with her during my lunch because she really needed some extra time. And I went to the special ed department. I say, look, I'm meeting with her 3 days a week during lunch. What can you do? Can you send someone in to be with her in my class? She had special ed support in English and history, but she didn't have it in math, partly because we have this low math, remedial math track, which is what they thought she should be in. So, once I asked a few times and they saw me giving my lunch, all of a sudden one of them gave their lunch and came once a week. So I think, you have to be as positive as possible.
You have to massage it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And just keep asking. And even for my own son, what I realized is that once you walk into the IEP meeting, a lot of the decisions have already been made. So you really need to talk to the key people before the IEP meeting, because the school district, as supportive as they may be, they're still interested in saving money. And teachers and principals are limited in what they can ask for. So I would always find out ahead what they thought my son really needed. And then I would go in with ammunition and ready to demand it, because the teachers, they have to be a little bit passive at these meetings, and they can't always demand what they know the student needs. So, I think some teachers have to kind of train the parents to ask for what they know the kid needs, and they have to do it outside. I mean, I have teachers who they'll have these conversations with parents, but never on a school email, because they don't want it to ever come back to them. So, and that's in a great district where there is.
We had that experience too. In fact, we got to the point where all of Jacob's teachers and therapists, mostly therapists, would send me their IEP goals and objectives and see what I thought of them long before the IEP, because we were all tired of going in there and spending 4 hours hashing through this stuff, that had already been decided.
Exactly.
So we did pre-meetings, we did pre-emails, we talked on the phone. Then we went to the IEP, everything went smoothly.
Exactly. I always ask for a pre-IEP meeting now, so we know what's coming. So I think this is our last question. As we have discussed, simply placing a child with a disability in a general education classroom is not enough. What are the first few ingredients you can think of which will create a positive inclusion experience for everyone? And I say this from both personal and professional experience. I see, just like what we talked about before, some teachers will allow a child to be placed in their classroom, but they don't
do anything.
Do anything. And there's both academic and social things, I think, that need to happen to flourish.
I think one of the really wonderful things that happened with my son in kindergarten is they had every day for the first 30 days, or however many kids were in there, each child had the ability to talk about their life. So today was Johnny's day, and Johnny would come in and bring things. His parent would come, it was kindergarten, right? Bring their favorite things, talk about who they were, talk about what their family was. And what was really cool to me is that they didn't bring Jacob up to the kids and say, okay, we have this special child in our classroom. We're going to, have to accommodate him, and we're going to have to be careful with him. They didn't do that. We just started with him in there with the idea that he was just one of them, and they just embraced him. I mean, they were 5, and some of them are 4. So, what did they know? But then when it came Jacob's day, we were able to answer questions, talk about, what was different about him. These are the kind of toys he likes. This is what he likes to do. And it was sort of a natural way for the kids to ask the questions they needed. And the teacher was very supportive of it too. I think being very deliberate in planning is important. So even if the kids aren't in on it at the beginning, having a good teacher that's willing and being deliberate in your planning as a team. So even though Jacob never set foot in a special ed classroom in elementary school, special ed teacher was part of his team, and his team at the beginning met weekly to talk about what's the classroom doing this week, how can we integrate Jacob into it and still meet his goals and objectives. And so this was his one-on-one aide, the speech teacher, the occupational therapist, physical therapist, special ed teacher, and general ed teacher, and it was built into the IEP to have these weekly meetings. And so it was a very deliberate planning done without bringing attention to the fact that he was different to the classroom. Secondly, we generated the circle of friends for him, which naturally happened because he started in kindergarten. But if we were going to take maybe a third grade student and suddenly put them in an inclusive setting, you'd want to build up that support at the beginning, have, kind of watch which kids gravitate toward that child and invite them to be natural supports. At one point, we had lunch buddies for Jacob. So every week, 2 different children in the 4th grade classroom, for instance, were assigned to sit with Jacob at lunch and give him natural support so the aide didn't have to actually be there feeding him all the time and stuff like that. And that worked really well. And they all wanted to be the lunch buddies. It was like being the line leader. And they, making it a privilege instead of a chore, putting that person in a positive light. So I guess those are things that really helped the children around Jacob include him well. I know that somebody having a severe disability sometimes is easier to include than someone who just has a little bit of behavior disorder or looks very typical but has that little bit of difference. Those are the kids that get more bullied. People don't bully my kid. He's in a wheelchair or was in a wheelchair and had to be tube fed and stuff like that. So it's a lot harder to include those kids that are just different enough that they stand out, But creating a classroom environment that is bully-free, where everyone accepts everyone, doing all that touchy-feely stuff where people are doing cooperative learning and all those kinds of things that, that you do in classrooms, can really, really go a long way, not just to include the person with a disability, but include everybody. So Jacob's circle of friends consisted of some kids, probably at least half of the kids were kind of the outcast, weird kids who didn't have a lot of friends. But when they came to Jacob's circle of friends, that was their friend group. And so it provided them with the social support they needed as well. It wasn't just for Jacob.
It's interesting also, the other reason why I think it's wonderful and helpful for you to speak is because, all the teachers in this class and are all looking to teach in New York City, where they're talking really about including very mildly disabled students, and even then there's very sharp opposition from parents and from teachers. So, it's interesting to see that a child doesn't have to fit in academically. They can achieve goals within the general ed classroom, social goals and physical goals, without necessarily meeting all the standards. The other thing I wanted to mention is my son actually fits exactly in with the child who kind of looks normal, but he's kind of odd. And really, I was worried continually through the years that he would be a target of bullying. And he's just finishing 7th grade, which I know. I teach 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, so I know middle school can be horrendous. And somehow it's been great. I just was telling Nancy yesterday, my biggest concern was the bus and the bus stop. And he walks himself 2 blocks away to a bus where 14 kids gather. And for the first few months of every year, I stand behind a tree about 1.5 blocks away, just kind of keeping an eye on him, because I see these very tall, cool kids, and I'm just afraid somehow that they're going to, he flaps a little, jumps up and down. He just has some mannerisms that make him stand out as someone who's a little odd. And he's also very gentle and quiet. So just a few months ago, coming home, he missed the bus for the first time. He had gotten on the bus and realized he didn't have his backpack. And he ran off the bus. And he has a cell phone and he knows how to use it. So he called me and he told me. But 2 of the coolest, most handsome kids that worried me the most, actually walked around the block and came to my door to let me know that my son had left his backpack and he was at school and maybe I should go get him. And I was so touched that these students were really taking care of him and they even asked another neighbor where I lived so they could find my house. And I stopped looking at the bus stop anymore because I feel like these kids they look out for each other. And I think partly we've had bullying workshops in the district, and then they come and they do an evening with parents, and they always say that of every district they've worked with in the past 5 years, ours has the least amount of bullying they've ever seen. And, he's at a middle school where there are 300 400 kids in a grade. So over 3 grades, that's over 1,000 students. And it's just, hello? Okay, does anyone, I think we're at our last question. So,
Looks like we have a question in the chat, Diane.
okay,
Yep.
Yeah, Diane, I think I don't know, can you hear me?
yep.
I posted 2 questions. I think it's probably easier to do them from the chat, as I said, because there's like 20 people in my room at the moment.
Okay.
But I posted one about ESL and special ed into sort of like where they interact, because we're all ESL teachers, and it would be really interesting to know what happens if you have a student who has both ESL and special education support. Do you have any experience of working in that particular sort of situation?
I don't personally. Do you, Diane?
I don't. My husband
Oh, sorry.
he's at home, but he was an ESL teacher, and now he's actually an inclusion specialist. So he's worn both hats, but he hasn't, I mean, I guess as an ESL teacher, he had to do with students with special needs, and honestly found it extremely frustrating because of various kinds of red tape that surround ESL students. In particular, the fact that you can't get special ed support for the first few years that you're in this country if you're an ESL student. So
because you have a second language, and so it's assumed that it's because of the language?
exactly.
Oh my gosh.
You know, and then on the flip side, some other students who really are not ESL students, but because of their disability can't test out of ESL, and if the parents filled out a form in a certain way. So it was really, it was so frustrating that he actually left ESL and went into special ed. If he were here, I'd put him on, but he just left for a doctor's appointment. But I understand that there are particular frustrations and complications surrounding ESL and special ed. And yet at the same time, some of the literature about differentiation and about co-teaching can certainly help, but it's a sticky situation. And then I see you have another question here.
Yeah, I've been looking at it. You're talking about not having access to IEPs. Oh, you're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
No. Yes. Okay. So yeah, we have 2 students who we can see need support, but we don't know how best to support them. And so I'm figuring it out as I go along in terms of there's some small things like we've worked out that tables are quite confusing. So giving them separate sections in their graphic organizers to fill in helps them in doing that, and we've seen quite differences. But are there any things that you can help us in terms of what particular things to look for in terms of how we can best help them, or just general advice in terms of, okay, these are some things that could help with differentiation? I know we've done lots on differentiation and we're going to be doing even more, but it was just a question that came to my mind as you were talking, since you seem to have a lot of experience on it.
Is there any way for you to get access to the IEPs?
No. Because we're just student teachers and our co-teacher isn't their main teacher, so she apparently doesn't have access. It's just because it's summer school, so we're only there for summer school.
I guess then my next thing would be to talk to the parents.
Okay.
And
yeah, that makes sense.
And ask them what, you can do to help their child.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
The other thing is to, if you have the time, to try and sit down for 20 minutes one-on-one with the students, even 20 minutes a day, before you're beginning an activity. Because honestly, it's funny, I differentiate a lot. Now I try and create projects that kind of naturally differentiate. We'll do them actually next week for a big differentiation week. But before I did that, I did a lot of kind of the more standard beginning ways of differentiating, where you have a couple of different levels of work. And honestly, a lot of the times I would get it wrong. I would think a student should be doing the easiest level. And then if I had a chance to sit with them, I would see that they could handle a little bit more.
I've had that already, yeah.
Exactly. So, when I speak to teachers who do a lot of differentiation, they plan extensively over the summer to meet the needs of the students coming in, and most of the time they can't use a lot of it. Not to say that it wasn't good that they planned it, because it lets the mind imagine all the possibilities, and then you really fine tune. So if you have some time to sit down with these students, you might get a good idea, find out what they're interested in, do some kind of little profile on them. If they're
I don't know how old they are, but you can just ask them what they need, and a lot of students will be able to tell you what kind of support they need in school.
Oh, grade 3.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
that's a really, really good suggestion, and one that I've kind of like been like, oh, but now you said it, I'm like, of course, yeah, I can just ask them what is the best way to help you learn this. Thank you.
It's funny, a lot of the things that make inclusion work, in the end, it's a lot of common sense. You know, when I sit down and talk to some of the really amazing teachers, I find like I have to give them all the technical terms. They don't even know what they're doing, but they're doing it all so well. Well, it's instinct. I hear a lot of it's instinct, you know, and appealing to different learning styles, making things available through audio, through video, through print. Scaffolding, if they don't know how to begin an essay, give them an outline and have them fill in sections, you know, things like that.
Yeah, we've been trying that, but carry on.
Sorry, I was just going back to your former question about barriers, and I think one of the biggest barriers is just fear. So Jacob's been in classrooms where the teacher was terrified and even wrote a letter of dissent to the IEP saying he didn't believe Jacob belonged in his classroom. 3 weeks into the school year, he was so excited, and you could see Jacob doing things, and it was just fear of the unknown, you know. And then when they realized, well, they're just kids, you know, kids first, then it just makes a big difference.
Thank you. That's been really helpful.
I think we're gonna wrap up the conference, but I'm really glad you came. It's nice to see you. I'm sorry I got a little. I tried to schedule it ahead, and then Nancy couldn't get in, so I opened up a new room. So next week we're going to try this again. It'll be much smoother. I'm not going to schedule it ahead. I'm going to open the room that day because I think somehow I scheduled it ahead, and then I don't know what happened.
Yeah.
You know, we've been battling tons of technical issues this semester. So thank you for being so patient, and thank you for.
If you're able to email the meeting ID as well as putting in course sites, that would be really helpful because I can't access course sites from the school that I'm in. It's like a firewall or something. So if you're able to send a standard email with the meeting ID, then I can access Zoom, just not course sites.
Okay, great. So I'll do that. I'll do that next week. It'll also be.
Excellent. That'd be great.
So maybe people can actually come. And I'll put a video of the whole thing up later, presuming everything works well. And
yeah.
Okay. So
okay.
I want to really thank you. It's always a pleasure to have you speak. And
I enjoyed it.
Yeah,
thank you.
Okay, and give Jacob a big hug for all of us for sharing his story over and over again. Talk soon.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.